Constant reminder, I think, to us as consumers and the public is that these technologies are not perfect. They will never be perfect. There is always a learning aspect to the development of these technologies. I mean, just period, all around us that's happening. And so there's always a way to improve. And so people will have to definitely take that into consideration. But there's also knowing how far the development has come thus far to know
Hmm.
that if you get in that vehicle, they're not testing your life. Okay, I can't speak for these OEMs, but I would
Right.
hope, based on the regulations that we have in place, based on all of the policies that are in place around autonomous development and even testing it on the road, there's certain processes they have to go through, and those systems have to pass in order for them to be able to test them on the road, because they're not going to play around with your life. So you
Yeah.
can remember and know that. So that, brings in a level of you feel a little safer, okay? Because it's a risk. You're getting into a car that doesn't have a driver. When we
There's some
ever,
peace of mind there.
there's some
Yeah.
peace of mind there, right? And so, but there's also misunderstandings that can happen when it does fail gracefully that they were not prepared for.
Get ready for a dynamic episode of Features Talk.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Features Talk Podcast, where we are exploring how technology is transforming the way that we drive, we shop, and the way we move around the world. Okay, I am your host, Lisa Bailey, and joining me is our resident automotive product specialist, Luke Versput. Welcome back,
Hello,
Luke.
hello everyone. Good to have everyone back for another good features talk.
That's
Um,
right.
yeah, it's been cool getting into this because what we've got today is actually a really big continuation um of what we actually laid out in our season one. We're actually on season two of Features Talk. If there's anyone new, we're glad you're joining. And there's actually a lot of backlog content
Yeah.
that we've already done, and so you can find all that on our site as well. And this is actually going to be a continuation of that. Not I'm not saying don't listen to this until you watch the others, but what we're talking about today is actually something that we talked a lot about the components of in
Mhm.
season one. And our big thing, like we've always said, is empowering people, bringing knowledge to people, especially about safety of vehicles, so that we can all be safer drivers on the
Yeah.
road.
Yeah.
But what we're also like to talk about every now and then is the brave new world we're entering now of, you know, having a driver that's supposedly so safe that there isn't one.
Exactly. Exactly. Which was autonomous vehicles.
Yep.
And you are absolutely right. We did a lot of talking. I feel like we were so ahead of our time with it, but it has, you know, if we look at where we are right now, just been so much that has happened in the space of autonomous technologies, systems, and just the advancements of it. And then now you add that layer of AI on there, and there's just a whole level of progression that we're seeing happening. And so today, we're going to be diving into the reality of how our urban transportation options are changing. And it is becoming a reality that autonomous ride hailing is a thing now. It's not something that we're just talking about or it will be here soon, or that you're only seeing it used in the services of transporting goods and products, autonomous vehicles in that regard. But now we're seeing it as, listen, it's on the streets. They are allowing people, just like you're calling your Uber, you can now call an autonomous vehicle. You can call it and it comes to you, and you have that real experience of in
Yep.
a vehicle with no driver behind the wheel. I mean, like,
Yep.
okay, we are seeing it and we're here. And
Yeah,
so,
it is. It's no longer the just pie in the sky, just a sci-fi thing. I know people use the term sci-fi as a
right,
cliche, but
right.
like really everything is sci-fi before it comes out. I mean, the automobile itself
Hmm.
was sci-fi
Hmm.
before, prior to the late 1800s when it came out.
Yeah,
Um, and so um, the they should have had a Features Talk podcast in the late 1800s. It would have helped them out.
that would have
So,
been
uh,
crazy.
anyway, but it's no longer that, right?
Right.
Like a twinkle in the eye of an engineer or something like that. It's
Yeah.
like here it is, and it's true what you said. A lot of people talked about um how, or it was initially talked about with like autonomous vehicles. It was always kind of a given that, like, well, the first place it should be implemented is in like transporting goods,
Yeah,
right?
supply chain.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, supply chain, like, maybe automated trucks or
Hmm.
delivery,
Hmm.
things like that. Because then, like, if something goes wrong with that vehicle, then, well, first of all, you hope that if it collided with another vehicle, that other driver is fine. But like,
Right.
if it does something and like hits a piece of infrastructure,
Yeah.
and no actual person is involved in the collision, then it's like, well, okay, so packages got delayed,
Hmm. Hmm.
whatever.
Hmm.
Everyone's life goes on.
Yeah.
But there's a whole different gravity to it um when it comes to carrying people.
Correct.
And what we talked about in before, and what we're going to touch on again now, is what are all the systems
Yep.
that work behind the scenes to make a vehicle autonomous. It's
Yeah.
not just as simple as tell the vehicle go here.
Correct.
You can
Yeah,
tell
it's
you can tell a person walk over there.
yep.
And we don't think much of it other than walk over there. It could
Yep.
just be walk across the room. But think about just how many individual, people talk about like the human brain being more
Hmm.
powerful than any supercomputer that like that humans could even conceptualize,
Yep.
and our brain's already more powerful than that. Think about how many individual pulses get sent from our brain to walk across the room, or for me to even just speak this sentence right now. Every little body movement, still breathing, every involuntary movement. Think about that, but like in a car where it has to be specifically told what to look for. There's a lot of it. And so the systems behind this, behind the scenes, are a few. They all fall under what we've always talked about as ADAS,
Yeah.
Advanced Driver Assistance Technology, which in this case, at its highest level, means full autonomy.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
um, the big ones are going to be the cameras,
Yeah.
the lidar, the radar, and ultimately the computer that brings it all together.
Yeah.
So, um, I would say probably the biggest one that's if not the biggest, probably certainly the newest one, the one that has had the most recent implementation
Hmm.
is lidar.
Yeah.
And lidar stands for light detection and ranging. We've heard sonar, radar, lidar. The reason they all end in the same dar is and ranging.
Hmm.
Sonar, sound navigation and ranging. Radar, um, forget what radar stands for. I don't know why I'm blanking on this, but um, it's essentially the same thing. It's for computing distance, right? Um, but then lidar is light detection and ranging. So lidar is actually able to sense 3D objects, not just how far away is something, but what is the shape of that thing. And that again, we don't think much of it. We just see it and we know what it is. But it's very different when lidar has to be told all that. And
Yeah.
so the lidar, and then more for like sensing 3D objects, the radar is going to be for like distance computing. How far away is something? How is the distance between a vehicle and an object, a person, a building, anything changing as it moves? At what rate is it changing? And then finally, there's cameras. And then cameras, this is actually really where, when you mention AI, this is where I think plays the biggest part in that cameras can sense are actually probably the closest to what we have as humans with eyes, being able to see objects for what they actually are, right? Because we don't see in terms of lidar, we don't see in terms of radar like a submarine with no windshield. Um, we see things for at least what we perceive just as they are in the real world. And cameras on cars are the closest to being able to do that. And it's continuous advancement in AI that brings all this together. And then, of course, there's so many algorithms that have to happen in real time, and real time is like quicker than per millisecond. It's like per fraction of millisecond.
Exactly. Exactly.
Um, it takes. I brought this up before. When we talk about airbags deploying in 30 to 40 milliseconds, And it takes human beings on average about 150 to 160 milliseconds to even blink your eye. And we think of blinking our eyes as such an instantaneous thing. We don't keep track of ourselves even doing it. But this is like
It's happening.
it's a sub 1 millisecond tracker on how all this is going on. And then of course there's a big computer that's usually mounted in the like underneath the floor of the trunk of what would normally be the trunk of the car that's computing all this. And a lot of real-time algorithms are this is what it's processing. And so this is getting into level 4 autonomous driving. We've touched
Hmm.
on the levels before because where we as people experience our driving the most is between level 0 and level 3.
Hmm.
That's kind of what we have the most of. But now we're getting into level 4.
Hmm.
And so the cool thing about this advancement is that it's cool to see like what used to be science fiction happening now. But
Yeah.
this also means that rider expectations are going to be changing, and it also means there's that this has led to some more involvement with really big companies.
Oh yeah. I mean, I I like the fact that you laid that foundation because a lot of the things that you just talked about, it's very interesting from the consumer perspective. We are all familiar with those things. We are all familiar with cameras on our cars. We are familiar with, somewhat familiar with ADAS. And radar and lidar, those are new terms, to us as consumers, but we're starting to know more about it. And so it's very interesting that we are already being introduced to these autonomous systems.
Yep.
But then now you're taking it a step further with what you're talking about with now we're increasing that level of functionality. And now we have a system. I love what you said when we first started. Think about how many signals that has to get sent to your brain for us to just come up with the conversation and the words that we're talking about right now. How complicated is that? And it is very complicated. We don't know the intricacies of that and how things are connected. I mean, if we do
Right.
enough studying, we will, but the
It's
average
so much it's
Joe.
so much more than we can even
Exactly.
conceptualize.
Exactly. The average Joe doesn't know much about it. So to think that a vehicle can now operate at a level where it is making decisions in real time and
Hmm.
it's picking up and detecting shapes. It's detecting color. It's detecting images all at the same time to not hit a pedestrian.
Yep. And I will say, by the way, I just remembered, I just in the back of my mind, I was
Yeah.
thinking, I was like, I could not, how do I not know what radar stands for? Radio detection and ranging.
Yeah.
Like I knew this. I knew this. I don't know how I drew that blank and forgot what radar stood for, but radio detection and ranging.
Yeah.
LiDAR is light detection and ranging. So just for anyone listening, I wanted to make sure that's when we say radar, that's what it stands for. Radio detection and ranging, which again is for computing of distance, distance, velocity, and how an object is changing distance is how an object's distance from another is changing.
Yeah. And that just speaks to the level of functionality that's happening on an autonomous vehicle. And so to think that now we are at a point in development where it's not just for the supply chain, but it is now that technology is, can I say, good enough? It's been programmed enough to become a ride hailing service. So instead of thinking, the Uber is coming with a driver in it, now we have vehicles that don't need drivers. And so to me, that in itself is a huge shift and it's happening. It is absolutely happening. Volkswagen just made an announcement with their partnership with Uber that they are going to be providing. This is for, people in SoCal. Okay. They just
Mhm.
announced a partnership with Uber that they're providing autonomous ride hailing services in LA in 2026. So the Uber
Yeah.
ride that you called, you can now select an autonomous ride where it is available. And I just think like, wow, like because I use Uber all the time when I'm in the city. And so to think that I can choose, to call an autonomous vehicle, I think is just it's just so cool, but it also indicates how far we've come. My goodness. Like, I just think that is so amazing. And there's a lot of real world. like real world rollouts happening.
Yeah.
And not only is the real world rollouts happening, now we're getting the real time public's reaction. Okay, things are changing now. People are turning on the camera and they're giving you the truth about how they are
Yep.
experiencing these vehicles and the technology. And so that's a whole can of worms by itself because, everybody will have a different experience with it. There'll be good experiences and there'll be bad experiences. But there's also so many things and so many benefits to having autonomous vehicles as a ride hailing service. And we'll talk about that later in this episode, but there's also Motional. Motional is in Las Vegas. And so that is Hyundai and Aptiv that are have a partnership and they also have their autonomous vehicles out. And
Yep.
so partnerships like Uber and Volkswagen, I mean, that is now putting autonomous vehicles in a scalable market. That
Mhm.
means that it's probably going to these services are going to start popping up in all kinds of experiences that you could possibly have.
Yeah.
Maybe instead of Uber Eats and someone's bringing it to you, it's an autonomous vehicle. I know that they're testing those types of things. And so I think we should have a conversation about consumer expectation. It is
Mhm.
very important as a consumer, and when you start to dabble and test and be an early adopter of these technologies, there's also the safety aspect of it. And that's what I love about
Yeah.
our company is that I love to go off into, imagination and start to talk about these things in a great way. But there's also a time to dial back and say, wait a minute, how do we as consumers manage our expectations? Because this stuff is still being tested. I mean,
Right.
let's not
That,
forget that.
right. And when you had said earlier, I think it was just a tiny little thing in the middle of what of
Yeah.
your of the main point you were making, but I think it was very important that you kind of gave yourself pause before using the term good enough.
Yes.
And which I think was good because I know what was going through your mind, which was that when it's people's safety and developing this
Yes.
kind of new technology, there can't ever be such a thing as good enough.
Right.
And so I would describe it as um competent enough.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just think, yeah, and I know you weren't implying that it's good
Yeah.
enough we can stop here,
Yeah.
but but yeah, it is competent enough now that where it can be a ride sharing service for people. And so as far as expectations of, what can you expect when you have something like this? Um, the okay, so the Uber Eats thing,
Mm-hmm.
if implementations of fully autonomous Uber Eats, DoorDash,
Mm-hmm.
whatever that may be, or whatever services adopt that, um, that isn't that isn't there like it is with ride
Correct.
sharing.
Correct.
So I think for people's expectations, I don't think there's an answer for that yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it would be more important to focus on the ride sharing aspect. And so
Mm-hmm.
as far as expectations of that, um, the it's as with any technological advancement like this, where the ultimate goal is, safe is the 1-2 punch of safety and convenience.
Right.
Because like we've said, it's it's no secret that the number one thing you can sell anyone is convenience.
Yes.
And if you can sell someone convenience, you can do just about anything.
Anything.
And so, for better or for very worse, but
Yeah.
um, the convenience of it, but then also, of course, there's the safety aspect. So the dream of it all is with no driver, I can just have it can be just stress. Well, the dream I would say for convenience um would be that the car doesn't have any human needs.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Mm-hmm.
no it's not it's gonna be on time.
Yeah.
um it's gonna be on time. It's not gonna have to use the bathroom.
Right.
It's not gonna have to get gas because, as we'll touch on later, these a lot of these autonomous vehicles, actually pretty much all of them are electric.
Yes.
So aside from them needing to charge, and that's on the
Mm-hmm.
companies to make sure that they charge
Yes.
them properly, then it'll just be there. It's the ultimate tap and go. Just tap it there,
Exactly.
gets you, brings you somewhere. No other human drivers, so you can sit in complete privacy, have
Mm-hmm.
a phone call without anyone else listening,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the case. Um, and then you just get there, and then you go. I mean, I guess you could call it, it's like the ultimate introvert's ride sharing dream.
Really? It sure is.
And so that would obviously be the best. And then of course, along with that, the other part of the dream is that it's just accident free. Like
Right,
it's a car that cannot be
right,
crashed.
right.
Um, and so that's obviously the dream.
Yeah,
Are we there yet? Well, no.
no,
But we are way closer to that than not that many years ago I think people thought we would be.
absolutely.
Now the reality there then there's the reality of it. That is where we are right now, because I've said this before, we always live in the now.
Right.
And right now, um, advancements in on fully automated ride sharing, the two biggest things that they're up against, well, the first one maybe not against, but is just regulations,
Hmm.
federal regulations around it.
Hmm.
Which reason I say I wouldn't say they're against that. It's not like companies are trying to like cheat the system. Quite the opposite, actually. So I wouldn't say they're against it. It's just that this is something that really does make a difference in how quickly they can develop things.
Correct. It's a
Because
process.
it's
Yeah.
a process. They're not gonna, and we all should be very grateful that these
Yes.
regulations are limiting the speed of this development,
Yes.
because um I mean, how many times has the trope in science fiction happened where, some corporation moves too quickly and humanity suffers, right? I
Correct.
mean, it's a trope in fiction all the time, but
Yes.
there's a reason these regulations are pacing the development of or actually forcing it to pace itself,
Correct.
so that it's better for our safety. I would say that what it has to go up against are, um, I guess I would say people like us, maybe not you and me specifically, but the public's perception of it.
100%.
Some people, now more like us, like the early adopters who are like really get nerdy about this stuff,
Hmm.
we're
Hmm.
like, shoot, get me into one right now. Let me see how it goes. I've never been in one. I
Yeah.
would love to be in one. I don't
Yeah.
have
I mean,
you.
I would too. That
I mean, I don't think
might
you
be a
have you.
future thing for us, Luke.
That that would be hmm,
Hmm.
maybe some maybe something to stay tuned for. But but I don't know. Have you been in one before? I haven't.
No, I have
So
not.
so
I have
so
not.
I
No.
mean, I think it would be sick, but
Yeah.
I think it would be a cool thing to try. But there's so many. The thing is, that's not the majority of people, though. Um,
Exactly.
a lot of people are like, no, if I have the option of driving myself or an Uber where I know there's a human that I can hold accountable for what happens,
Exactly.
then I'm going with that. Nope,
Yep.
don't keep me away from the autonomous. Nope, that's not it. That's what they have to go up against right now. It's navigating. Those are the two biggest things.
Yeah.
Um, the regulations, the regulatory stuff that is pacing, making sure the pacing of the development is safe for us, which is good.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
then also, people who are not wanting to adopt it.
Yeah.
And so, and the thing is, it can only really get better the more people try it out. And
Exactly. And
so
that's what they have to understand.
yeah, people have to understand it's things like this. It will get better the more people try it out.
Correct.
And and then there's also other things. I mean, there's weather limitations.
Right.
These vehicles have to be essentially taught or programmed how to perform in different weather
Hmm.
conditions.
Hmm.
How could extremely inclement weather throw off, LiDAR, for
Yes.
example, or
Yes.
radar or camera lenses.
Yeah.
Um,
That's so important. Oh, that's important.
and so I know you've used a term before in when it comes to developing technology in this space, which is to fail gracefully.
Yes.
Um, and and that's and I know the way you've used that term before, um, when talking about how like developing new features and that are not standard yet, and that it's important for people to try them out because, um, yeah, the tech has to be able to fail gracefully. And I think I could say now, looking at it all, and you probably agree with me that I think these kinds of services are at a point where they can be allowed to fail gracefully
Oh,
and
yeah.
not be like you're rolling the dice on waking up tomorrow or something like that.
Yeah.
So
That reality is important, and it's a constant reminder, I think, to us as consumers and the public is that these technologies are not perfect. They will never be perfect. There is always a learning aspect to the development of these technologies. I mean, just period, all around us that's happening, and so there's always a way to improve. And so um, people will have to definitely take that into consideration, but there's also knowing how far the development has come thus far. To know
Hmm.
that if you get in that vehicle, they're not testing your life. Okay, I can't speak for these OEMs, but I
Right.
would hope, based on the regulations that we have in place, based on all of the policies that are in place around autonomous development and even testing it on the road, there's certain processes they have to go through and those systems have to pass in order for them to be able to test them on the road, because they're not going to play around with your life. So you
Yeah.
can remember and know that. So that, brings in a level of you feel a little safer, okay? Because it's a risk. You're getting into a car that doesn't have a driver. When
There's
can we
some
ever
peace of mind there.
there's some
Yeah.
peace of mind there, right? And so, but there's also misunderstandings that can happen when it does fail gracefully that they were not prepared for. And so that's the conversation that we can have now that we see it becoming more of a mainstream thing in ride hailing. We have people pressing record and they're telling you what's happening in these vehicles. They have,
Yeah.
and some of them, okay, I've seen so many recently, over the last year, I have seen the stories increase more and more as they are offering these services. And I've seen people jumping out of the car unexpectedly when maybe it failed gracefully. Or I've seen drivers or riders, I'm sorry, in the vehicle and they didn't know enough about the experience, nor did they possibly do any research or maybe read any education about the experience where they knew how to communicate in the car if something went wrong to get help. Because I'm pretty sure there has to be a way
Yeah.
for if something goes wrong and you're in that back seat, there has to be a way, whether it's in the app or there's a button in the vehicle and you can communicate. So there's all these different experiences that we're now having forefront in front of us that's showing us, oh, this tech is failing gracefully. And so that doesn't mean that development stops. That doesn't mean, oh, I'm just going to do away with this whole option. It's how do I better understand so that we can reduce the safety risks? So
Hmm.
I've talked about this before. This whole shift that we're seeing in transportation, everybody is involved in making this shift go smoothly, right?
Yeah.
We got the government involved, the auto manufacturers are involved, the OEMs are building, you got the designers, and then you have us as the consumers actually testing, actually putting ourselves in these vehicles and having experiences with them. So we have a responsibility to just empower ourselves a little bit more with what we should know if the tech does fail gracefully. And so a few things that I want to call out, just to debunk some of these myths that you might see in a story, because there's
Hmm.
always someone's opinion about how that ride and how that experience was, whether
Yeah.
it's positive or it's negative. But that is not going to necessarily stop the development of autonomous ride hailing services. It's only going to improve them. The company will improve, and so you will improve yourself by learning things. And so, a couple of things I want to call out is knowing the safety protocols. There are safety protocols when you're riding in an autonomous vehicle that
Yes, there
you
are.
can become aware of. And part of that experience is knowing where the help button is. So, is it in the app? Is it you communicating with customer service? It's also asking the right questions, how to start and stop the ride. So you may not be able to control the vehicle, but you can control the ride. And so there's these different levels of understanding that will improve your safety while you are in a autonomous vehicle. And then also knowing not to panic when the car makes an unexpected stop. And
Yeah, exactly.
it's easier said than done. I've never been in one yet. And so even the thought of knowing someone's not behind the wheel and the vehicle is doing something you didn't ask it to do, is going a different route. You have no idea where it's going. I can absolutely understand why you would start
Yeah.
panicking, you
It's
know?
understandable. That would be a pretty quick knee-jerk response of get me out of here. But um, keep in mind if the car stops unexpectedly, I mean, all any of us have had to stop unexpectedly when
Yeah.
we're, doing our fully in control human driving.
Yep.
And so it's important when that happens, don't, assess the situation and see like, okay, did it stop because someone ran out in front of it? Did
Right.
it stop because did it stop because there a car in front of it just had to slam on its brakes or something?
Yeah.
So then it's like, well, if you were driving, you'd have done this. If you were paying attention, you'd have done the same thing.
Exactly. Exactly.
And just because the car did that when you were looking down at your phone in the back seat and weren't looking,
Mm-hmm.
then then just consider yourself, well, what if you were in the driver's what if you were driving your car and you were doing this?
Correct. Which
What if you
happens
hadn't
every day.
Yeah, what if you hadn't stopped?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Then you know what that wouldn't have been? That or actually you know what that would have been if you were doing this and the car didn't stop unexpectedly when it needed to? That
Yep.
would be an ungraceful fail.
Exactly.
That
Exactly.
would be a very not graceful fail.
Yeah.
And so um and so then that's the car paying attention doing what it's supposed to do.
Correct.
Um
Correct.
that's like good job,
Exactly.
it did it. I mean, and then it would be a different story if like if it's now this is not the way these are. These kinds of services are not on the freeway. These things don't go on the
Mm-hmm.
freeway.
Mm-hmm.
They're only for low speed,
Mm-hmm.
local surface streets. But if or not if when if it gets to the point where it's there on the freeway, and if in the flow of traffic going at a fast freeway speed, if they just suddenly decide to stop out
Mm-hmm.
of nowhere, okay, then admittedly yes, then you've got a problem. That
Yeah.
sounds like something where yeah,
Yep.
okay, maybe it messed up. But again, that's not what we're talking about. Where we are at is what we have now. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a reason why you see when, with Waymo and so many others like you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
when you look on their sites and you see all of their displays, it's all made to look very pretty for marketing
Right.
to make their product look appealing. But you kind of look past that, why is it that they always show, look how safe our vehicles are in a crowded urban area with people
Mm-hmm.
crossing the street, people riding
Mm-hmm.
bikes on the sidewalk? Because that is where they can gather the most data. They can get,
Exactly.
there's more stuff happening there,
Yeah.
and it's more crowded. There's more data for radar and lidar and cameras to pick up on,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
and it's where they can get the most people interaction,
Yeah.
right? And so because these companies need to track what are consumers' expectations.
Right.
How do they improve their product going forward? I mean, you know, as a business owner, like
Yeah.
your whole
Yeah.
thing is, I mean, that's the thing of any business is
Exactly.
how are
How do we
people
improve?
responding? What are
Yes.
the expectations? How do we use that to go from here?
Yes. It
That's
is.
what it is.
It is that knowledge, and I love that you made it just as simple as that because that's exactly what it is. And so that also brings an awareness to the side of the need for education. So not just these
Mhm.
markety commercials and gathering of the influencers to show their experiences, but listen, we need education. And so now you're also seeing a push for more regulations
Yeah.
and safety audits, and then community engagement. How do we start to step the community into this experience? How do we test these types of services in certain communities? Because that's even happening. They're looking at communities that have a limited access to transportation options. So they are putting these autonomous ride hailing services even there. And so I believe San Francisco has requested to limit some of their AV deployment hours because they want to go back to the drawing table and make sure we've got regulations in place and safety audits in place to keep our pedestrians and our riders safe. And so there's so much going on in the background around autonomous vehicles that the average person is not aware of. But these are all things that you can take into consideration that really progresses towards improving the safety of it. That's
Yeah.
really what it's about, improving the safety of it. And so it will have to fail in order to improve. We all know that. As a human being, you are going to fail to improve. Well, technology is not exempt from that. And so Luke, what should consumers do? Like if they're saying, you know what, I'm getting ready to take a Waymo. What
Mhm.
are some things that you would call out that they should do to prepare for that? I mean, yes, get excited, but let's talk about some things that you can do to prepare.
Right. So yeah, and then again, the nice thing is I think we're it's really great that the technology and everything and the regulations are all at a spot where I don't have to give like my first point of advice is like, tell someone you love them or something like
Yeah.
that. Um, so I would say to prepare for it, the first thing is, research the company itself.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have to like carve out an entire, week or day for it, but look at some of the things of how they, yeah, and again, yes, it's all made to look, very pretty for their product, but do look at what they have.
Yeah.
And so that, and look at what they have, look, because they go into big detail about their safety features.
They sure
Um,
do.
this is not the days of like, like people think about like, oh, a sleazy car salesman selling snake oil because people don't know any better.
Right.
Um, I mean, they're just people are so in the age of where information can be had so quickly. Um, and I mean, what we do as part of that is
Mm-hmm.
of that information. People can get information so quickly. Like these companies know they can't pull a fast one on people
Yep.
as far as like what technologies are we using to keep people safe,
Mm-hmm.
or just trust us, it's safe,
Mm-hmm.
or oh, the car, it's like magic, it's like drives itself like magic,
Exactly.
like no, no one's going to be convinced of that. So research the company, look at what they showcase their safety features as, the lidar, the radar, the cameras, and things, and
Exactly.
everything like that, and um read about where they implement their services.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so, okay, oh, if they implement their service in San Francisco, in Los Angeles, in
Mm-hmm.
I know Waymo's, I think their next big expansion is going to be Atlanta, Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Another
Mm-hmm.
very,
That's
very,
huge.
very populous area.
Yeah.
We're in Southern California. We're on the other side of the country there, but well, I mean, everyone, it's one of those things, like if you're in the US, like there's the big ones. There's New York, Los
Mm-hmm.
Angeles, Atlanta,
Mm-hmm.
Georgia is one, Miami, Florida.
Right.
Atlanta, Georgia is one of those like big populous areas. So that is, I think, was Waymo's next one. If you look and see, okay, they're implementing in these areas.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I live in Los Angeles, so they say they do that here, but they also do in very other similar areas.
Exactly.
Okay, so I'm not going to be a fringe case of this.
Yep. Yep.
I'm going to be just another one of the many, many, many people using this.
Yep.
And there's been a lot more that have gone well than have gone not well.
Exactly.
But if you see like, okay, I'm in a remote suburban community or a very rural area, then you have the expectation of, well, they don't serve this area,
Yeah.
and I'm going to have to bring myself to that area. And so
Exactly.
obviously expansion to areas like that will happen when they happen.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so then once you prepare for that, I would say once part of that preparation also is the vehicle itself.
Mm-hmm.
Waymo uses, I think, exclusively Jaguar I-Paces,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
which is a previously manufactured, Jaguar electric kind of
Mm-hmm.
crossover SUV.
Mm-hmm.
Think Mustang Mach-E and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Tesla Model Y.
Yeah.
So Waymo uses that, and other companies use, probably other models. Again, them all being all electric is pretty standard now.
Exactly.
And so research that vehicle, because they're going to have on their site what it looks like inside.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe look up, like in the case of Waymo, look up a Jaguar I-Pace non-Waymo.
Yeah.
Interior is going to be largely the same. Um, and then it's just all the stuff grafted on the exterior that will be different.
Exactly.
But you'll see on like the site, on the ride hailing service site, they'll say where the help buttons are, how you can
Right.
access the manual, what kind of app on your phone should you have.
Exactly.
Undoubtedly, there's going to be an app of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
know what app to use, and know where the support line is.
Right.
How can you hail help like that?
Yes.
Where's the helpline? And then also, um, I would say I would advise go under the assumption that it's going to be fine.
Yes.
Um, I think with how much just sheer skirt, we could eat up a week's worth of episodes talking about, if we wanted to do deep dives on
Mm-hmm.
what regulations these companies have to go through.
Exactly.
I mean, we could eat up almost a season of features talk on that, and which
Mm-hmm.
we're not going to do that. But you probably have seen more than me. Like there have been companies, like startup companies, that have wanted to get into the space that have
Mm-hmm.
started up and failed because they couldn't even start testing their vehicles,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
because the regulations around just can you start testing are so tight that
Yeah.
like companies have started and failed because they couldn't even get to the testing phase.
Yeah.
So the fact that now there's like these companies like Waymo and others that are partnering with large OEMs like Volkswagen Group, which is,
Mm-hmm.
I think, the largest automotive conglomerate on the planet.
Hmm.
Um, and they're in these very populous cities. I know you mentioned Vegas is another one
Yeah,
with Hyundai's partnership with Aptiv. The fact that they're here, honestly, that should tell us something
exactly.
about once you're there. I would advise go in with the assumption that it'll probably be fine.
Hmm.
Probably
Hmm.
nothing's gonna go wrong because most of these do go well.
Yes.
Um, and given that, also know where to report issues,
Yes.
or I would stress this also as kind of a consumer tip here, um, kind of which is I guess a little different than my normal product specialist tip of like, oh, how to what to look for when you're
Yes.
buying your car. But I would say kind of a consumer tip on this one is in addition to knowing how to report something that goes wrong, um, I would implore everyone, please also know how to report when it goes well, how
Exactly.
to report the good experience, because
Yes.
reporting the good experience for this, especially for this kind of thing, is just as important as reporting what goes wrong. Um,
Absolutely.
I mean, how many times if you're at a business, whether it's something as like a simple as a quick bite to eat, or a big service, whatever it is, big or small, how many times do we interact with the business, and if it goes well, we go on about our day.
Hmm. Hmm.
If it doesn't go well, then if it really doesn't go, then we
Yep.
might leave a review or something. But how often do you leave a review for every single time a business, even if they're not exemplary, they just do what you expected?
Yeah.
We don't leave good reviews for every single one of these. I mean, it would just be so many.
Yeah.
But for this, I would really implore people. The undoubtedly the app is going to ask you, rate your experience.
That's
What
right.
can you tell us about your experience? If it was fine, don't just go, well, I got here and then just close the app. Like, report the good experience.
Yes.
Because remember how I said the more data these gather, the better the services and the vehicles become. That is their
Exactly.
data. And they can't just be receiving all bad data.
Yep.
So report the good experience as well. So yeah, I would say research the company itself, and then the vehicle that they'll be using, and where the help button is, where the manual is, and then also talk to others,
Yeah.
talk to others around you. Especially I would say talk to people in person that
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
driven these. Only reason I say that is I'm not saying don't look online for other people's impressions, but like when people post online, some people can post some pretty disingenuous experiences,
Agreed.
where they will, kind of overblow it. If something went wrong, they might, make it seem way worse than it was.
Hmm.
Um, and things like that. And so, like there's, some people use it as a way of like fear mongering, for example.
Exactly.
So, yeah, there are a lot of good ones. There are a lot of good reports you can read online, but there are some people who post some pretty disingenuous experiences about automated ride or
Hmm.
autonomous ride sharing. So talk to people
Hmm.
about the experience to kind of see what they think. And again, I think the bottom line is, go in assuming it'll be okay. Because we're
Yeah.
at a point now where we couldn't the services we wouldn't be talking about this if it hadn't gotten to a point where it can be assumed to be working.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Those are all great tips. I think if you have never had a Waymo experience or any autonomous ride hailing experience, that those tips right there are great, a starting point. Get to that company's website. I mean, absolutely. They lay it all out for you because they have to. There's
Mhm.
transparency that they have to have with us. And so even the bad experiences have to be documented, and the good experiences are being documented as well. And so I completely agree. And I want to shift gears here because now that we're seeing the expansion of autonomous vehicles in ride hailing services, especially in
Yeah.
like these very populated cities. So it's expanding in these cities. What does that mean for the future of car ownership? Because
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I know how there is a plan at play to reduce the amount of vehicles that are on the road, which would then have environmental effects to it. But there's also campaigns around being more healthier. So instead of driving a car, you're walking or you're riding a bike, or we also have these micro mobility options now.
Mhm.
E-scooters. I mean, I see e-scooters everywhere. Everybody has an e-scooter. And
Yeah.
so these new ways of moving around are expanding into the cities, and so what are we going to see a shift in everyday driving for families? Because I'm thinking about it in a sense of urban mobility. And it sounds
Yeah,
like we're moving into this idea of, urban mobility of the future with autonomous vehicles, with autonomous ride hailing services. And so
yeah,
the reduction of personal car ownership in dense cities, and then also I know that they are integrating the autonomous vehicles with public transit, so
mhm,
having them to
yeah.
be able to integrate that ride as well with public transit. And then there's also and I am aware of multiple companies that are now starting to look at the curb. So we're now, okay, let's just think about this.
Starting to look
It,
at the curb.
oh, I'm going there. There you go.
Uh-huh.
They're looking at the curb space design because they're saying,
Mm,
okay, now that we have autonomous vehicles, and this is really outlandish right now to think that we would get to a point where there will be more autonomous vehicles than, personally owned vehicles operating on the road. But when
right.
you think about the amount of vehicles that are parking in these dense urban cities on the road, if you now can reallocate that space to be a ride hailing space, now we're talking about redesigning the curb. We're talking about
Oh yeah.
having fewer parking lots and having more pickup and drop off zones.
Hmm.
And there are companies looking at, honestly, the curb has become an asset. It's very crazy, but it's a real thing. It's
Hmm.
now, how do we bring this curbside service with autonomous vehicles, and what does that look like with lesser cars on the roads? And so it seems like there's a shift that we are going to. Like I said, the reality of that is probably far off, but the point is there's a shift headed in that direction.
Hmm.
And it'll be interesting to see what car ownership looks like, with this expansion of autonomous ride hailing services and this kind of pickup drop off culture. What do you think about that, Luke?
Yeah, well, I mean, as far as the future, I know the first thing you mentioned, like future of car ownership, for me as someone who's like a huge car enthusiast, I don't want to ever not have a
I know, I
car that
know,
I can call mine.
I
It doesn't
know.
have to be doesn't have to be like I don't even mean like a nice luxury car or anything.
Just the
Because
convenience.
yeah, because like I mean the car I have right now, if you get the most expensive version, the highest MSRP you can squeeze out of the car I drive is 27,000. Like you know, I'm not saying that's a tiny amount of money, but like I'm not talking about it like a luxury car, but like the just the fact that it's mine and that like
Yeah,
I can just get in and you know have my own, have my own
exactly.
key and
Yeah.
and operate it myself.
Mm-hmm.
That's like that right there. Like for me, there's something to that. So
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I personally always want to have it as a thing because it's
Yes.
the thing I like.
Yes.
So, and I know there's a lot of many others like me that will be like, some people are more ashamed, like I'll never own a car without a manual transmission,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
whatever. Um, the enthusiasts will do what they do, but again, it's and car. I will say the car enthusiast community really often loses sight of the fact that sometimes that they are not the majority of consumers.
That's right.
Um, if they were the majority of consumers, most cars would still have manual transmissions.
Oh yeah.
And
Oh
then
yeah.
we all know how that's gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for most people though, for car ownership, that this is again something that we have touched on. We talked about this in season one a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's weird. It's interesting to think about. Like we think about like because there are some people that also like really are kind of on the opposite end, so where they actually really do not like cars. Like the
Right.
presence of cars in cities really bothers them.
Yeah.
Um, and so what you're talking about here is kind of like, we talked about earlier, like what is the dream versus what is the reality?
Yep.
Well, for a lot of people, the dream is a bunch of autonomous EVs, um, or maybe if not a bunch of autonomous EVs, just some mode of transportation that that does not make cities any louder, dirtier,
Correct.
or anything. And
Correct.
it's just transportation as a means to an end,
Yeah.
and it ends there. And to do it autonomously and safely, then all the better.
Exactly.
Um, but the reality of it is, we're not there yet, and so there's a necessity for many to own a car, and for the people for whom it's a necessity, um, it's going to depend on just how much the self-driving or the, I'm sorry, not self-driving, the autonomous vehicle technology can be implemented, curb
Mm-hmm.
space and so on, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
And so in very dense urban areas,
Mm-hmm.
would car ownership makes sense.
Exactly.
Um, I think that for certain types of cars, it still would. I
Mm-hmm.
just don't think, and I'm trying to look at this as objectively as possible, not just in my own world where like
Yeah,
I
yeah.
like I like having a car, and a lot of people that I know also like having their own car that they
Mm-hmm.
can work on and so on. Um, and so I think even trying to remove myself from that and look at it more objectively, like from
Yeah.
the outside, I do still think that there is enough. Think there's always going to be enough people that enjoy owning that kind of thing that I think to an extent it will still make sense
Mm-hmm.
to be used as an enjoyment thing. However, I think the nuance to this is that for people who have a commuting job where they just maybe it's a 9 to 5 order where they just have to commute and go somewhere, I think then maybe it won't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think there's a future where car ownership does make sense for the people who want it, and I think that it should be these companies should be held to that, and obviously they are, that if they're going to implement autonomous vehicles, they need to implement them around human drivers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I don't think there should ever be a time where they go like, okay, now driving is prohibited. You can only use autonomous transportation. I really don't see that as realistic at
Yeah,
all.
I
Um,
don't see that as well.
so yeah, that
And I don't think
extreme.
that's the goal either.
No, it's not. And
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying. It's not the goal of the companies to do that, and
Yeah.
it's not the goal of the regulations to do that either.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think the nuance to this, I don't think it's a total yes, we still all need to own a car, or no, no one should ever
Right.
own a car. I think the nuance is that car ownership, this right here, like the ability to do this, will be
Mm-hmm.
seen as more of just a personal enjoyment kind of
Correct.
thing. Not unlike, you know, not unlike something like this,
Right.
you
Right.
know, just for personal enjoyment. Um, but for a day-to-day just kind of job, like frankly, when I drive to and from work,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of thing, I think it would make autonomous services more that would make more sense. And then I think then you're getting into this we've talked about before, not to tangent into this, but that would be where it becomes a subscription service,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Oh yeah.
Where
Oh
it's like
yeah.
where instead of having to call it each individual time,
Yep.
it is just expected
Yeah.
that okay, this person is going to be using this service on this schedule on for this many times per year and so on and so forth. So um
I
I,
believe that
yeah.
that Uber partnership, and Uber having this autonomous ride-hailing services is a stepping stone to that. It's
Mhm.
it
I
it
think
is
so
a
too.
it is a stepping stone to, that becoming a reality in that space. And I completely agree with you. I truly believe that um, they are considering all of the use cases for autonomous ride hailing services, because that's what we're talking about today.
Yep.
Not just the vehicle, but it being used in a service. So that vehicle is being used in a ride hailing service. And they're looking at all use cases. And right now, it is more focused on those urban dense areas. I mean, how many New Yorkers will tell you, I will not own a car?
Oh
Because
yeah.
it just doesn't make any sense for me to own a car in such a compacted area. And so they have the subway, they have all of these, they have Uber, right, and Lyft and all of these ride hailing services. And so
Oh yeah.
to to understand what a dense area like that would look like with not having as many, personally owned vehicles kind of taking up those curbsides. I mean, I even know, and I believe they actually stopped this. I don't quote me, but New York rolled out, I think this was like last year or the year before. They rolled out a program, and I think it was short-lived. If I lived in New York, it would have been short-lived for me because I would have moved. They were charging a fee. I have to do some research to see if this is still happening, but they were charging a fee to their citizens who drove vehicles into the downtown, the very dense
Oh, I think I heard
area.
about that. I think I heard
Yes.
about.
And so
I don't know if that's still in play either, but
I
I that
think they
sounds
stopped
familiar.
that. I think they stopped that because the public spoke up about that. And
Oh, sure.
that is very, here it is. We're saying that I don't think that this would happen, but that is an extreme decision for that governor to say yes to a program like that. And
Yeah.
so even though it didn't last long, who's to say that they don't roll those kinds of programs out in different urban dense areas where now if you're being charged, okay, if you have the financial capabilities to be charged to go to work every day in your car, then you're going to have a car. But if they have now autonomous ride hailing services that you can now say, oh, I'll do that instead of driving my car. And now I'm not being charged, right? And the ride hailing OEM, whoever that is, probably has some kind of partnership with that state or that city to offer those services. And so, even though that's extreme, it happened. It happened.
Yeah, I mean
Like,
it's I think yeah, what you say is something what you said is I think plausible or something like that doesn't sound like it could be completely like impossible,
yeah,
but I mean for it to be done in the time it was done, I'm like, well, okay, so if you're going to suddenly implement the fee, I mean, what do you have a do you have an entire fleet of like full of
correct.
did you have an entirely did you have an entire fleet of fully autonomous ride sharing vehicles that are just ready to go that you weren't telling us about?
Well, maybe
That
they
so
do.
so, so that like
Maybe they do, and we don't know about it. This is why it's so good that we are able to have these conversations because if you're paying attention, there are small little pilots that are rolling out that are making statements. Like I said, even though that pilot, if you want to call it, in New York was rolled out for a short period of time, that thing made it past regulations and was approved.
yeah.
So, I mean, that in itself to me is mind bending. And so there's definitely a future of urban mobility that we're headed into where things will change. But I agree with you, Luke. I don't think that we will ever see a world where we are not allowed to own a car. I do think that they will start to change certain areas, like urban dense areas. They will start to introduce certain technologies and different experiences that we hold as something that we do, and we
Mhm.
will be given an option of here's a new option, here's a new opportunity and a way to experience that. And you will either, sign up for that or you won't, just like Waymo. There are people signing up for that experience, and there are people that are just like, no, the majority is like, no, I'm not going to be the test dummy. I'm not doing that yet. So
Mhm.
there's just so much change coming to um, the world when it comes to urban mobility. And the
Yeah.
curb space redesign is very interesting. I think that's something that is a nice call out for our listeners to if that kind of piqued your interest, do some research because they're definitely looking at the curb and how they can redesign it. And then you got the EV and the AV combo. We want cleaner, quieter cities. That's where they're headed. And so there's the push for EV and the
Yeah.
infrastructure that's happening around that and the regulations that are happening around that. And you have the AV combo as well. And so there's also another side of it where there's equity and accessibility. So they're looking at autonomous ride hailing services where you have underserved communities, which we mentioned earlier. But
Right.
there's
Yeah.
also the accessibility for seniors. So the individuals, the mature drivers who can't drive anymore, given for whatever reason that is, whether it's a health reason or, maybe they're just not that alert behind the wheel. But you also have those with disabilities. And then you have non-English speaking riders and citizens as well. And so it will be interesting to see how autonomous ride hailing services kind of dive into that part of the world and how they are being offered in underserved communities. Communities where
Hmm.
you would not think EVs or autonomous vehicles will be pulling up at people's schools and picking them up. That is something that we might start to see, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. We could. Um.
Absolutely.
And then I mean I don't know if I don't know if how much those kinds of things would really serve. I mean, they could, how much they could serve like very rural areas.
Hmm.
Um, Getting into those, I mean, then you have to start looking at different kinds of EVs. Like then you have to start looking at like EV trucks and SUVs to actually even tackle that kind of terrain. And if it's a very rural area, people there usually have like that. I think is where it does make sense to really
Right,
own your own vehicle. But again, that's not the urban setting that a lot of this is focused on.
right, right.
Um, and but yeah, it's the autonomous vehicles would have a lot to do to help people of those
Correct.
kind of those circumstances. And the other big thing is this kind of the other thing I wanted to touch on is again with it serving new kinds of people and in different areas, it's going to be all the more important for them for the companies to get the feedback that they need.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
like I said, the app is every app says it, right? Even apps that like like my Gmail app says it, and so does like the Instagram app or whatever. It says like,
Hmm.
hey, will you rate our app, right?
Yeah.
You know, um, and it happens all the time, right? And businesses need reviews, they need feedback. That's
Hmm.
how it happens. Um, and so it'll undoubtedly it'll say, rate your experience, and you don't just want to like give a few stars and leave it there. If you're partaking in something like this, like really take the time to describe it. It doesn't have to be an entire essay, but like
Right.
write something about how it was. Was
Hmm.
it good? How could it be improved? If something did go wrong, then I would say go into detail about what went wrong. Um, and that's why I said if there's malfunctions or if instructions were not clear, if finding that big like the help button,
Yeah.
the big SOS button or something like that,
Hmm.
if that wasn't as easy or intuitive as you think it should have been, then say so.
Yep.
And right alongside those, giving feedback of however many stars, and then saying it was a great experience. Everything went great. I was able to find the help button this, and we're literally it's like if your review was if every single like if this is the future, leave it right here. It was perfect.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
that's obviously not what they're going to do. There's always improvement to be made. But
Yeah.
them getting that review back is just as important as hearing that that something didn't go right, because
Exactly.
they need to know when it does go right. And so we've talked about before about how consumers have power in the market. They
Hmm.
have power um in how companies go about their goods and services.
Right.
Um and that's there's obviously there's been you know decades of debate over free market capitalism being good or
Yep.
bad, and that's we don't have any opinions on that.
Yes.
That's not our thing. But you know what we do know is that we have power as consumers,
Yes.
and not every system does that. And so because we have that power, we can one, vote with our wallets to either use something or not
Hmm.
use something, buy something
Hmm.
or not buy something. And if we do choose to use it, well, companies in competing for our business are
Yeah.
looking for feedback. How
Yep.
was their business utilized? And
Yeah.
so again, I guess I can't stress enough, report both good and bad experiences with these things. And the reason I want to touch on this is this actually also has to do with the question that we got from our listeners this week. So
Hmm.
um, if you're coming to us here for the first time, we have a segment of our features talk called Listener Lane,
Hmm.
and we've been very fortunate to have a great community of people in the industry, but also just people listening for their enjoyment and their information, which we love and appreciate all of them. And we've been fortunate to get questions from them and just kind of wanting our take on certain things and
Hmm.
or information about things. And so we had a listener report gave us that they said, if I don't feel safe in an autonomous vehicle, as a passenger, what are my rights? As a
Hmm.
rider, what can I do about that if I don't feel safe in the autonomous vehicle?
Yeah.
And that's where I would say pretty much all these have a live support system where
Yep.
you can press help either as a hardware button on the car or in the app, and actually
Hmm.
get a live person on the phone right there.
Hmm.
Uh, and so that is something that a lot of these ride sharing companies have that the autonomous ride hailing services have had to adopt, where if there's not going to be a human driver, the only way to get consumers on board is to basically have the human expert
Oh yeah.
one touch away.
Oh
Like
yeah.
if they're not in the car, have them as accessible as possible.
And not a
So
robot. I need
not
a
a robot.
human.
Yeah,
Okay.
not something automated. Exactly. And so and there's also, for these, there's also just an end the trip early kind of thing.
Exactly.
You can and that's actually, you pretty much always find that in the car itself,
Hmm.
where if you can just say cancel my ride, and the car's not going to just stop in the middle of the road in traffic. It'll pull over. Um, but you have those there. And the other thing is, I would say it's very important to do research before you go in.
Hmm.
Um, if you felt that, if you use the ride hailing service, and you find that, it didn't feel right, or it didn't feel safe, it's going to feel unfamiliar, obviously. It's,
Hmm.
it's not it's
Hmm.
not something anyone's
It's
used to,
new.
but
Yeah.
it's going to feel new no matter what. So I mean, you should go in realistically expecting that. But
Exactly.
if it's something really felt wrong about it, like not just wrong of like, oh, there's no driver, but um, if it seems like something is not going well, or the car is actually behaving in an unsafe way, then just again, I would say assess the situation, look around it, and consider just what all it's having to take into account. And maybe it's driving in an overly cautious manner. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
in ways that we as people probably, safety wise, cut some corners every now and then,
Hmm.
because we're human and we
Very
do
true,
that.
Luke. Very
Um,
true.
so that kind of like ultimate by the book driving behavior that
Hmm.
these things have to adopt might be a little unfamiliar.
Yeah.
Um, and so, do research on how they operate, what their safety features are, and especially what tools you have to intervene. Not that you grab the steering wheel and start doing it
Correct.
yourself. That is a big no-no. Don't ever grab the wheel and try to muscle the autonomous car into doing something.
Yeah.
That will not help anyone.
Hmm.
Um, but um, but know what options you have for ending the ride early, and for contacting help.
Absolutely. And they can also, and that's when you're in that ride hailing vehicle, and you're taking part of that service. Those are all things that you can do to feel safe. And I think the more informed you are, the more safer you're going to feel. I mean, if you just
Yeah.
know more, you will feel safe. And so just being prepared, and knowing how, if something were to happen, it's the ultimate question that you should be asking is, who is responsible for my safety in this vehicle? Once you ask that
Mhm.
question, then you're going to figure that out, right? And there are, not just the OEM is responsible, but the government is responsible, because you have the National Highway Traffic and Safety Administration, who are responsible for performing the audits, for putting together the policies and the processes. But then you have organizations like PAVE, the Partners for Automated Vehicle Education. They
Yeah.
work with the government, they work with the OEMs, and they develop education around it. So this is a whole resource library available to you to better educate yourself when you're considering an autonomous vehicle as a ride hailing service. And then you
Yeah.
also have your local Department of Transportation. I would say their resources are really more technical in nature.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so if you're really looking for some consumer friendly resources, NHTSA and PAVE, they are great resources for you to be able to prepare yourself as you're, preparing for that type of service as well. And so I guess, I can say it. Autonomous ride hailing is not a far off dream, guys. It's already happening. It's not just here. It's happening. It's
Yep.
happening and it's expanding. And so it's okay to be skeptical and cautious about it, but knowledge equals power. And so the better informed you
Yep.
are, the better prepared you'll be. So, keep asking the questions. Stay curious. I'm curious and I ask questions. But why? Why is it this way? And then if this, then what? And those are great questions to ask. So don't be afraid to take the ride literally, because they have I think that's one of the OEM's tagline is it's the future of, it's something like the future of transportation, but now. So you can ride in the future right now. You can get, an autonomous ride hailing experience right now. And so
Right.
this has been a fun episode, Luke.
Yeah. Yeah, I've enjoyed this, and I would say my bit of as far as our kind of what I would leave people with is to kind of go back to essentially also part of the answer of your question of who's responsible for your safety.
Hmm.
While it is true that all those are there, and those are all very very important. That
Hmm.
it's one of those cliches of knowledge is power, but it's
Yeah.
so fun. It's so funny that every time that comes up, it's actually true.
Hmm.
Who
Hmm.
knew, right?
Hmm.
Um, it's like when say like oh you hear like oh time flies and you don't think much of
Exactly.
it, but then like I have a godson who turned 3.5, and now I'm like oh time
How did
flew.
that happen?
Yeah,
When?
yeah. And so um but knowledge is power, and I would say who is responsible for safety? The last component of that is
You.
you. Not quite in the same way of when you're driving your
Hmm.
car, keep your hands on the wheel, look at what you're doing. Don't trust your, ADAS features to be some autonomous vehicle,
Right.
which they absolutely are not.
Right.
Um, and so being responsible for your own safety in an autonomous vehicle, I would say, um, there are several that should go with completely without saying, but I will say them anyway. Don't jump out of the vehicle.
Yes.
Don't take your seatbelt off when it's driving. Don't try and grab the wheel and test it to see like, oh, if I try to cause an accident, will it force
Hmm.
me to not do an accident? Like, don't do anything stupid like that.
Hmm.
Again,
Hmm.
these should just be a given, but just to throw this out there, don't do stuff like that. Um, but you know, given that we're going to go about this like an adult and utilize the service properly,
Right.
you being responsible for your safety, I'm saying you, anyone who chooses to use it, us being responsible for our own safety is, you know, keep yourself informed.
Absolutely. That's number one. That is 100% number one. And that is why we are here. That's why Features Talk is here. So keep you all informed and go a little bit deeper in these conversations and not just making it look good, but we're honest. We're being honest in this podcast. We're telling
Oh
you,
yeah.
what's happening and what's not happening. And we're not really taking a stance as to what you should or should not do. We
Yep.
want to inform you. And then the more informed you are, then you can make a better decision as to what you think is best for you. And so,
That's
with
right.
that said, for our listeners, if you found this episode helpful, don't forget to share it with someone that you think it would be valuable to. Subscribe, leave us a review, let us know how these topics are, landing with you. And if you want to hear more information or you got a question, keep bringing in those questions and catch us at our next episode. And until next time, drive
Drive safely.
safely.